Every story knows its teller. Every story has its time. Yours and mine has its place and time. Every story knows its teller. Every story has its time. Yours and mine has its place and time. It's time. Born in Africa, but breastfed another mother tongue, put to sleep on foreign lullabies, taught to pray for a Jesus heaven when I die. Born in Africa, but into a cultivated, designated patch, flung far from the indigenous tree, strategy for carving out my destiny. Born in Africa, but mixed, equaled inferior, rearrange your exterior. Scorned for the secret exposed by my skin, enslaving beliefs this child was bathed in. Born in Africa, but I have died to the hiding, dividing, fearful deciding of who I am, who I should be. Born in Africa, but a self-made prisoner, I release captivity. I am free. We are free to unfold the sacred map. None other will dictate my individual destiny. Born in Africa, but living, living before and beyond, living before and beyond. A universe awakens in me. When people think of the word imbongi, they have a particular image in mind, but that to me is a version of a praise poet. I am here standing first in gratitude for the opportunity to hold a space, and I wanted to start with acknowledgements and gratitude. We have very little time. To each of you, which is the sound I was yodeling about, for your courageous vulnerability and generosity in the work that you have brought for us to feast on, to share, to learn from, to be healed by. I want to also acknowledge the incredible book fair fire starters, Frankie Murray and Mervyn Sloman, and their trusty production festival team. Hello, it's 7 years. Can we please? That is a major feat. Authentically diverse, transgenerational, come on, it's a major accomplishment. And then I want to acknowledge you as the audience. We had another venue and it was sold out, so we had to expand and come into this place. So I'm thanking you for your presence, your support, and the evidence of the recognition of why this conversation is so important. You might call it a debate, an issue. It's a conversation and you're very much a part of it by being here. Forget this line. I want to do the introductions. You can read your programs and Google the fabulous people we're sitting in. But at high speed, Kelly Koopman and Sarah Summers are co-researchers and creators of a 6-part web series called Colored Mentality. In their words, was the making of space for discussing colored identity and exploring what colored means in Cape Town, South Africa, before, in April, March this year, embarking on a 1,000-kilometer Khoi liberation walk to reconnect with their indigenous heritage. They interview a range of Cape Town-based public figures, well, some are in Joburg, but van die Kaap af, arts, media, celebrities, and role models, depending on where you're coming from, literally and figuratively. You could describe Colored Mentality, the series, as posing provocative, even inflammatory, or seemingly innocent, direct, simple, weathered, yet persisting questions. And it took me back to the research and exorcism for myself around these issues when I wrote the play A Colored Place in 1996 and opened up what I felt was a minefield. And a place that we are still, clearly, I'd like to say as South Africans, thriving in relation to, but actually it feels like writhing. We're still writhing in relation to this, and a progression towards a future that we all continue to project our historical baggage, wounds, and aspirations, visions, and love into. Questions like, what is a colored? Ouch. Are colored people black? Is Afrikaans a white language? What is colored culture? Does colored privilege exist? Those are the kind of questions Colored Mentality houses on that platform, and there is more than just that platform. Sara-Jayne King is a South African journalist, radio presenter on Cape Talk. Her career spans more than a decade. The incredible book she has birthed is called Killing Caroline, and it is her own story as a transracial adoptee, secreted out of South Africa to England in the early 80s. Time, the micro story and the macro story really powerfully brought to the fore in this book structure. They form the basis of this debut book, a memoir. She is passionate about relating to identity, race, adoption, issues relating to race, adoption, mental health, and addiction. So this is the kind of book you chunk through. You try not to chunk. It's not only the tears, but I think the profound resonance that so many people, I knew, even thinking about who this book was for. Who would this book be for? Yes, you show the baby. Good. Show the baby's face. But also that it sat on my chest for days. Even when I wasn't reading the book, I was walking with it. These issues in relation to what we're here to talk about, identity, race, mental health, and addiction, very much a part of the territory of so many people who have this identity projected on them, imposed upon, and the sense of alienation, not belonging, and this overly simplified version of, I'm not black enough, I'm not white enough kind of narrative. Zimitri Erasmus. We all had that moment. He's associate professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Wits, editor of the seminal volume, Colored by History, Shaped by Place, New Perspectives on Colored Identity in Cape Town in 2001. If you do the Google Scholar thing, you will find about 1,000 citations of her work. No, I'm not kidding you, 1,000. Since 1999, when Google was just paying attention. And it's my immense pleasure to meet her again, because it feels like a reunion. I migrated from KwaZulu in 1997, worked on Robben Island, but I was coming here on fire with a play, A Colored Place, and I was invited to perform at the conference that preceded this publication, Colored by History, Shaped by Place, which had essays of distinguished scholars on the subject, Professor Crane Sudin from the Department of Education, I'm not sure if that's still at the time, and then Dr. Sean Field, Director of UCT's Center for Popular Memory. I know this is a lot of words, but context is really important, just holding us in a space that has all these dimensions in it, and we have a miracle to perform in 45 to 55 minutes. One of the things Zimitri said back then was, we can't deny the meanings attached to skin color, but we can learn to live differently in our skins. There is more than one way to be colored and more than one way to be black. So the kind of question she was raising then was, who is black in South Africa today? And who is colored? And who is in charge of these definitions? And why does it matter? So that was then. We are here now. You can show the baby. Race Otherwise, Forging a New Humanism for South Africa, is a monograph that zooms in at incredible depth and with such expansiveness into the same terrain, with a visionary and invigorating way of articulating the complexity around colored identities. And such a resource, not only for our time, we are talking about generations ahead. And I'm imagining that we will remember this conversation as, remember when the books were smelling new? Because it's that important, and it's a conversation that will follow us and live with us. And I've been trying to think about one word, because I started to study. I was underlining like a student, feeling I should be in a course, and realized, no, we don't have time for that. So one word is liberating, for me, that I'm still walking with as I learn to love and live with this book. Both in how it is written, because it weaves the tongues of history, academic analysis, philosophy, and poetry. And because it feels personally, to someone who was personally, historically classified as colored, as an arts activist and author, having tackled these topics in many ways, different media, I've always had such a great ambivalence about holding a space for this conversation or being labeled as, no, you should belong in that conversation. It felt like already, by virtue of the invitation, there was an assumption about how I identify. But this hunger, this identity, belonging, integration conversation, for better or worse, is still with us. And the manner in which Zimitri's book opens up, literally opens up all the frames, is so inspiring. Thresholds, tangled threads through past, present, lineage. Yeah, you need to get a copy. So here we are. Please welcome. So when we had a conversation via email, we all acknowledged that it's unrealistic to imagine that we're going to meet people's expectations of this conversation in less than an hour. And we definitely feel very strongly that it needs to be a conversation that involves some of your voices and inputs. And I do have a specific question for each of you. But some of the themes that we want to float in the ether around us as we journey into this conversation are family and social narratives, what we are told, taught to believe about her histories, the omissions, erasure, and forgetting. Creolization, going beyond black and white binaries, looking at overlapping and conflicting colored identities and communities that we can speak to. Shame, secrecy, silences, as well as discovery, exposure, or shattering of these. Roots, identity, self-definition, self-reclamation, even self-love, as well as how travel or living away from home informs, feeds, and triggers us, triggers growth for us in relation to these. Healing, belonging, self-love, acceptance, power, and resource of personal story. Why are our personal stories so powerful in this? Where is the relevance, the place? How is that catalytic? So let that hang. I'll remind everyone of them if that's necessary. But I thought we could start by diving right into each of you for 3 to 5 minutes, just telling us a bit more about where in the sight of this subject you have started your work. I've described what you've already done, but you probably are in soil that is still generating things. So either reading an extract that you feel you'd like to share with the audience speaking to this, or telling us a bit more about further than what I've said. Yes, you please.
Okay. Hi, everyone. It's really nice to see people because Colour Mentality is obviously a social media platform. And so we're engaging constantly, but to be in a space where people can actually discuss is always exciting. How Colour Mentality started, I feel like we talk about a lot on the page even. The first episode is why we decided to do this. What I'm very interested in discussing here is also that I feel that we are in a position where we're facilitating conversations more than just starting conversations or deciding what the answers are to conversations right now, because the platform's so interactive and there's so many people that are sharing their resources with us and are commenting with us that for us it's almost like we're kind of feeling out where people are and then how to engage with that. So I'm pretty excited to be here on a panel with Zimitri, because when people started asking us questions, we would just be like, at Kelly's mom's place, reading Zimitri and figuring out how do we tackle these things. So I suppose, again, for me, what's interesting are loads of things that are coming up on our page. There's a lot of people calling up for why are colored people anti-black? What are you going to say about that? Then how do you sit in that? Also just displacement, where do colored people find themselves now? There's so much. So I want to go with the flow here, and see where the panel's at, where people are at, and how to place myself in that.
So I just want to add one thing, because our work is obviously the same body of work, but just relating to where it started, other than the media platform, it comes from a place of self-identification and understanding what it means to actively take on the term colored, and also understanding what it means to occupy multiple identities and where the spaces are for that. And I think where the audience conversation became so interesting is that being colored is an identity that still faces a lot of reductive stereotyping, or there are certain assumptions that are rooted in various things about what that means to declare yourself as that, or what a colored community is, or just what the term kind of imposes. And so the conversation was very important for us, even the whole walk, going back to a kind of heritage that we don't really know much about and don't really learn about in schools, and then also kind of understanding a decolonial process with that, and just engaging with an audience in making the conversation really wide about the myriad of lived experiences and nuanced identities that come under the term colored, in a space where often it seems to mean one thing or come with a lot of implications. So it was a process of unpacking that for ourselves and then having that conversation with a wider group of people online.
Thank you so much for being here, and I think this is such an important conversation. And just to give you a brief, before I dive into the book, a brief kind of my background. My biological parents are black and white. My father's black, my mother's white. And my birth certificate says that I'm white. It's a whole thing. And, and I often get categorized as colored, very rarely in South Africa as black. In the UK, where I grew up, coloured was a term that you just don't use at all, but half-caste apparently is okay. Biracial, but mainly black. And for me, my identity has always come from there. It's never come from here. And that's something we were talking about reclaiming that I have been on a process of doing. And I'll just read a little section at the chapter called Brown Girl in the Ring. In the summer of 1989, my friends and I discovered the joy of sleepovers. The movie Grease becomes our go-to. We watch incessantly, learning the dialogue line by line, perfecting the choreography and swooning over a young John Travolta in tight black jeans. When we return to school in the autumn, we relay to the boys in our class the basic premise of the film and tell them we will be recreating the Pink Ladies and the T-Birds. In the same way I know I will never play the Virgin Mary in the Nativity play, I know I will never make it as one of the Pink Ladies. Despite the fact I have the best singing voice and know all the parts, I also know there's no brown girl in the Pink Ladies. I spend most of my childhood accepting that my brown skin sets me apart from my friends. Brown is not the norm. No one looks like me. All of my friends are white. And for most of my childhood, I don't even think about thinking that this is strange, because they're my friends. Pretty little girls with swingy hair who, like me, are into ponies, New Kids on the Block, and coming-of-age movies. We skip around the playground, our arms linked, longing for the day when our chests will be full enough to support even the most basic of sports bras. I mostly feel that I'm like them, but there are times when it hits me that the colour of my skin will always get in the way of my truly being part of the group.
truly honored to be here today. Thanks to all of you for coming, and wonderful to be with you women. So, at 17, I stumbled upon a defiance of racialized logics in the story of Stephen Biko, written by Donald Woods in 1978. Steve Biko, as we all know, was the leader of South Africa's Black consciousness movement that refused the racial category black as a technique of domination and redefined it in emancipatory political terms to refer to all people oppressed in contexts of white supremacy. I read about Biko's story when I stayed in a village in the southeast of Holland, close to its border with Germany. And at that time, I was the first Black Rotary Exchange student from South Africa to visit this part of the Netherlands. My journey to Holland and my time there brimmed with contradictions and possibility. It was the first time I had left home unaccompanied by close friends or family, the first time I had left the Eastern Cape, my first journey by air, and the first time I had had my hair cut short. The picture is in the book. The wash, straighten, curl, and swirl routine for my long hair and its accoutrement, a hooded hairdryer, and no fewer than 35 extra-large curlers could not go to Europe with me. These items would not fit into my limited luggage. More importantly, these local hairstyling practices would not fit into what my family and I imagined Europe to be, a place of sophistication where such practices represented its opposite. Dressed in a green Springbok blazer, I joined Rotary students from Australia and New Zealand, all of them white, at what was then Jan Smuts Airport for my 12-month-long sojourn in Europe. Soon after my first presentation at the Rotary Club in my region, I discarded my blazer. During frank discussions about South African politics, everyday life, and the injustices of apartheid, I voiced my discomfort at wearing this symbol of white South Africa. I was the safe black young woman for Port Elizabeth's Rotarians. Black enough, and yet not too black. Amsterdam was the place where, for the first time, I saw people considered black walk the streets of a city centre by day and by night with what struck me as a sense of ownership and belonging. Their postures flipped the posture of deference, albeit a posture held for white people with which I was familiar. This experience left a lasting impression on me. It was 1982. Donald Woods' book, because of its liberal outlook, and along with many others, was banned in South Africa. It was not on the meagre shelves of Corsten Library. For a while after reading about Steve Biko, I saw myself as black with a capital B, in the black consciousness sense of the word. Thank you.
Shoo. This is quite a contraption. So we have about 15 minutes in which we can point to more specific things that I would like us to bring in, and then open it up. So Kelly and Sarah, talking about colored mentality, what I wanted to find out about is, I'm relieved to go online and find that since 1995, 6 or early 90s, when I was doing work, but also checking out who's talking about this, and not even as, internet wasn't as much a part of our reality in terms of a medium of communication and ownership and self-publishing agency, etc. So much, if you just click colored identity or mentality, so much streams up on the side. So many other voices are using this medium to engage around the subject, and in multiple ways, even multilingually, etc. There have been productions of theatre, obviously Afrikaans, huge, lots of arts education initiatives. Ernestine Dean's film, Brown, the work of Janine van Roy, Black Pearl, many, many people in this particular region, but all over, plays in Durban, etc., and Johannesburg. Coloreds, K-U-I-I-L-D, braino.com, look it up. Fascinating. And I'm thinking just about this, are you intending to continue in this medium? How is that, will you engage both, bring your medium or your products in this medium into these kinds of face-to-face conversations? Where to from here? Because I imagine this is huge. The more than 1,000 K is huge.
Sure, I'll start. Okay, so I think, because the space exists in an online medium, not to say that everyone has online access, because we also know data is a thing, it's expensive, not everyone has access to a computer. But I think so as you said, this is not a new conversation in any way. Like, this is something like we can't figure out, like, mutually as a society. There's no, one definition that we can go, cool, like, we all understand now where the space that colored exists in. But I think for us, like, as you mentioned, bringing it into an online space meant that people who are not necessarily in spaces like these, or academic spaces, or student spaces, could interact with media in their own ways, either by responding in creative writing or by responding with a link to an article or an opinion. So it became very important for Sarah and I that the space wasn't ours, and to just facilitate it as a place where any type of expression or language or personal experience was valid, and not like in a hierarchical sense. Because I think that the conversation is often isolated in certain spaces, and the conversation that's happening at home or in schools, like, the two spaces don't necessarily meet. So while we have been in quite a number of these kind of talking engagements, I think that it's important for us to keep that connection between what we can do with the online space and these spaces. And that being said, what's important for us next is to make the discussion more of a very specific community discussion. So where we want to go with the platform is to start working with areas or communities that are seen as colored communities, and start looking at, like, grappling with the issues or the representation that people in these specific communities want to bring out, because the conversation can also become one that, like, exists differently within different classes, within different areas, differently rurally, different in an urban space. So that connection to communities and offering the space up to communal identities is very important.
Very exciting.
I'm basically just going to give another part of what Kelly said. Because colored mentality did what we didn't expect it to do, in the fact that it had such a big response, meant that a 6-part season that started also as just development for a documentary that we were making, suddenly meant that we were responsible for this platform. So suddenly it wasn't just about these 6 things that we unleashed. We had a platform to maintain and look after and think about its future. And so, because I think colored mentality started as a very, like, personal, like, how do you understand yourself? And whatever you understand yourself as, let's, like, try to make that space as educated as possible, but that's your identity. For us now, it's important to start thinking about community identities and the identities of different places, so that it gives us the opportunity to make the conversation, I suppose, more nuanced, but also allow more people in.
Thank you. So Sara-Jayne, sister, I don't know if everyone else was feeling that the silence was about the voice of this little girl that lives in all of us, really, after what you shared, and thank you. When I read this title, it hit me in the gut for a couple of reasons. The subtitle is What Happens When the Baby They Buried Comes Back. You've got birth and death in one question, and the idea of visibility and invisibility, which is so powerful, and the ways in which people are made invisible, even by virtue of a gaze, as in I do not see you when I'm moving through spaces, or I don't look at you as someone I can think of in a leadership position, etc., etc. Just literally the gaze. And I felt that so much because of how much children need a gaze that is an embracing, loving, I'm seen, and the extent to which we will go to be seen, to be loved, to be embraced, to fit in. All of those things are so visceral in your book. It is lots of cellular memory coming back for me, also finding myself that anomaly in places that were predominantly or exclusively even occupied by white girls. So when I think about this title of Killing Caroline, you have a really incredible structure in this book. It's like a slow, for me, a twisting of a screw that gets tighter and tighter because there's this impending doom of all these revelations that come as you journey through the book. I think that's a very powerful structure. But also thinking about how much had to die along the way. So not only, it starts already with this really profound notion of killing a baby, but there are so many deaths that happen along the way, versions of yourself, aspirations of what it would be like to reunite with your mother, coming back to Halala, New South Africa, but actually Madiba's just died, to the ways that people still speak to each other in what to you was a violent language, at the robot or at, so that, exactly, Stellies, all, just so. If you can just speak to some of those little deaths.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
And it's funny you say that because the deaths weren't intentional. When I started writing, the only death that I was focusing on was the faked death of baby Caroline, or me when I was 6 weeks old, by my biological mother. But so much died in this book, and I think it sort of was by accident, but towards the end it became very deliberate, and it became more. The more I became aware of it, it was like a cognitive thing of, oh, okay, rebirths and deaths and rebirths and deaths. And for me, in terms of the death of my identity, almost preceded the birth. The death of my identity almost preceded the birth of my identity. And that's a really strange space to occupy. And from the time that literally from the time that I was born, my identity from the outside was stamped on me. My birth certificate still to this day says that I'm a white person, white baby, whatever. Then I moved to the UK. Then the idea that I was a mixed child meant that had I stayed in South Africa, I would have gone to a coloured children's home. Growing up in the UK, my biological parents are both white. My late adoptive brother was black, mixed race. But we were the black kids or the half-caste kids from down the road. But the older that we got and the way that society also changed, half-caste died off and became replaced with mixed race. Mixed race died off at some point and became black. And through all of this, I sort of just accepted what was put onto me because I had no idea, I had nobody to tell me otherwise. So I put on the coat that you told me to wear, at any given time. And that's a very strange space to occupy, more so than coming back to South Africa, where I'm told, well, you're not black, okay? Well, you're coloured. Well, first of all, it took me about 5 years to get used to the term coloured without bristling. Then there was a period of about 2 years where I didn't bristle, and now I've gone back to bristling. So that was a strange space. And arguing with people, black, white, coloured, whatever, that I'm not coloured. And in fact, it's funny that, you know, I was sort of looking when I was asked to do open book, and I looked at this first thing, and it said, discussing coloured identity. And I said to my partner, do they know that I'm not coloured? What? You know, and I said, I'm going to have to phone Frankie Murray and say, you need to take me off this panel because this is you know, I'm on the wrong panel. And then as I thought more about it, what was interesting, because it was simultaneously kind of coincided with the book coming out, was that it was then another example of you are discussing coloured identity because we see you as coloured. Never mind how you identify yourself, which is not as coloured. But I'm so grateful to be on this panel because I think it's such an important discussion we're having.
Thank you so much. I also have, when you mentioned just the particular stations of this projection, I thought about being at Home Affairs, you know, this ridiculous, for example, in my family, every member was historically a different category. Mother, father, 3 brothers and I, 2 brothers and I, all had different racial categories, which were part of the 8 subcategories of coloured, which your last identity digit in your identity number distinguished. So there were many of those bizarre things. And then the name changing, born Louine Ann Conning, but now Malika Ndlovu, wanting to keep my Caroline in where I feel she's at home, and rebirthing around Malika and Ndlovu. I really identified also with that. The power of name giving, name changing, name claiming, name preservation, you know, chucking a colonial surname to go with an Nguni one, not because I wanted to be a Mrs. Anybody, but because it felt more authentic. It's actually part of, that's my ancestry, Xhosa, Zulu, Scottish, whatever. So it's very, very visceral, I mean literal, legal is still with us. How, you know, legally, you changed your name.
Yeah,
You claimed your name.
I claimed my name, and bizarrely, King is the surname of my biological mother's husband, who is not my father. And I went to Home Affairs, and I wanted to have him taken off my birth certificate and my name changed. And they said, you can't change your surname without, because my birth certificate said Caroline King. They said, you can't change your surname without good reason. And I thought, I've probably got the best reason ever. And you know what, who knows, one day I might take up the name Makwala, which is my biological father's name, because it feels like it fits me. It feels like it fits. I don't know, we'll see. But it's my choice.
Exactly. This is your question, Zimitri, from your own, I'm going back at you. You say this book is less about racism as structure of power and more about specific processes of racialization, namely processes of making meaning are framed by the history and the politics from which the structure of power emerges. In this book, you challenge 3 normative ways of knowing integral to the practice of racialization: the look, the category, and the gene. I grapple with ways one might think about the inside of racialized social life as a space from which new sorry, I keep wanting to sing, of coming to know and new arts of making meaning can emerge. All of us live in amongst racialized structures of social meaning. We cannot be outside, above, or beyond the past and the present, nor can we be outside, above, or beyond race, because we are embedded in a racialized world. Its ways of seeing and its injustices can be apparent to us, and we can be inspired to change it. I am taking up the challenge offered by writer Toni Morrison. For her, the racial house we live in does not have to be a windowless prison, nor should we wait for the perfect liberation theory to do the work of unmattering race. In the ongoing process of our liberation, we must create openings in the racial house. We must refuse to live by its rules of dominance and its significations. We must refuse to bleed the raced house for its gains, the gains it provided in authenticity and insiderdom. Yeah. So, that's only a 30-second soundbite. If there's something else you wanted to bring, but this, when I thought about, I first thought liberation in reading and the multiple ways you speak in this book, the languages that you use. But then I read it after, you know what I mean? I saw the word liberation afterwards. I don't know if people understand academic research as a liberation process, as an act of protest, catalyzation, activism. I don't know if they think people sit politely behind desks in libraries very quietly, because this book is far from quiet. However you want to come to that, sister, please.
Well, I think there's been a shift for me. Because in the 1990s, I was very, focused on what does this concept colored mean, and why are people so, either obsessed with it or what's the word? Ambivalent about it, And then what I discovered, of course, is that this is not the only place in the world where, people struggle with these multiple histories. And that, for me, was absolutely crucial in taking what was an experience that was often considered to be exceptional to South Africa and saying, oh, no, 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 right? The concept of creolization is a concept that helps us understand that these historical formations, pardon me, are part of a global history that is connected not to ROOTSs, but to ROUTESs. Not to roots, but to roots. And that was a very, very important moment for me. And, in the last few years, in the North and in the Cape, there have been moments when I have been stared at by young black women with such contempt that I felt as though I was being looked out of the room, looked out of the world, looked off the face of the earth. And I thought to myself, what is this contempt all about? And that is when I began to explore the question, what does it mean to be human? And of course, I discover the whole liberal humanism, the liberal humanist notion that in the Western imagination, in this, to be human means to be a European man. Everyone who is not European and man, right, is less than human. And I thought to myself, there has to be another body of literature. And then I discover Sylvia Wynter, right, where I begin to learn about what it means to be human on the other side of power, not on the side of power. And that, for me, is a very, very important political project, is a radical humanism. And that is what Fanon writes about, right? That is what he means when he talks about new humanism. It's not about the liberal humanism of Eurocentric thought. That's not what he's writing about. And you find little bits and pieces of critical humanism in Biko. Little bits and pieces. And what I really want to do is for us to focus on the idea of the human as a political concept. It's not about we have, 99.9% of our DNA is the same. That is not what being human is about. Becoming human is about how we make what it means to be human. And that does not have to be a raceless concept. It cannot be a raceless concept, precisely because of its history, right? But it can be a concept that helps us negotiate the complex routes, R-O-U-T-E-S's, that we walk. And that, for me, is liberation.
I was so tempted to ask about love and eros, but we'll be sure. Don't even go there. Just get your book. As you can hear, literally the liberation feels like either hold your breath or breathe deeply or sigh, but something to do with breathing space. With these very tight, suffocating, dusty, archaic coffins. You know what I mean? That dead in relation to our living beings. I don't know where I remember seeing this idea of human becoming. So the coming is in parentheses inside this idea of being. And this, you talk about humaning. As, not humanizing, not humanization, but humaning as a creative, ongoing process, which has obviously lots of breathing space. In this breathing space is your opportunity to have any inputs. The rules of trying to make this work constructively, according to TikTok time, was that I should take one question at a time, but I don't know about that. We'd just like to hear any feedback, comments directed at any of the speakers or directed to, or just your voices for the next 10 minutes. Hi, yes. So, I want to ask the panel, would you like me to take one or two other few points and then we can talk into it?
Sure.
Yeah, I just want to be as inclusive as possible. Yes and yes, starting here.
Hi, my name is Carla Bernardo. Hi, Leanne. Leanne and my father came up together, and relatively the same story. We still trying to track my father's history, my father's family's history, which is of course something almost impossible for colored people, all those who identify as colored. And my mother's side is Pikwa and Java. So there's slavery and there's indigenous people living. My question is related to the ends in that often when you try to claim the space of colored identity, you're accused of being anti-black. How then, to all of you, navigate that space? How do you claim your own narrative when the narrative has been said that by doing so, you are divisive and you are feeding into this apartheid notion and that you are anti-black? And then the second thing is that, just a comment on what Leanne said, often I enjoy going and acting as a troll online in this white supremacist conversations. And they always first look at me as white, so they accept me for a little while. And then you start getting into the conversation, and for them, worse than a black person is a half-caste. For them, that is just, you are a sin. So it's that as well that we don't deal with, that's never brought up. And then the other question is land.
Sure.
We just came out of a land expropriation conversation, and someone bravely shouted from the back, what about the Khoi and the San? So where do we bring that in? Where do colored people fit into the land question?
I hope that those that are posing the question understand that these are our questions to live and journey with beyond the next 7 minutes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Those are potent. Dasi biryani, go for it. How does it taste to each of you? Who'd like to begin? Any?
I mean, we ask this all the time. How do you have to begin to see any?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, there is no single colored identity. There are a range of ways in which people historically classified colored identify. And maybe what I should do is read just, and I'm trying to find where that is now. The idea of mixed ancestry implies pure ancestry. It implies mixed race. It implies pure race. Colored identities in South Africa are not about mixed race, not about mixed ancestry. mixed heritage or mixed origins. Instead, the category coloured refers to those South Africans loosely bound together for historical reasons such as slavery, creolization, and a combination of oppressive and selective preferential treatment under apartheid. Coloured is neither a common ethnic identity nor a biological result. Sometimes coloured identities overlap with black as a political identification, sometimes not. Creolization is constitutive of specific cultural formations in the plural. So there is no such thing as a coloured culture, but there are creolizing cultural formations in the Caribbean, in Latin America, in Africa. This means that the category coloured always overlaps with African. Some people classified coloured regard the category as derogatory. Some scientists use this very contested socio-political category. That is what coloured is. It is a socio-political category. It is not a genetic category. And yet some scientists use it as a category, as a variable for comparison in their study of human genetics. So there is no single coloured identity. There is no single coloured culture. There are creolizing cultural formations across the globe. And so creating a coloured identity that is political is a contradiction in itself. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 2 minutes. Would you like to say anything, Sara-Jayne?
Just following on from Zimitri, is that there is an idea, and I think all of us perhaps are guilty of perpetuating it, that the black experience, the coloured experience, the black experience, the coloured experience are monolithic. They are not. And the more we realize that they are not, the more we have these conversations, the better we are going to get at unpinning the label from you and unpinning that label from me and saying, it's, you know, and I'm not saying race doesn't matter. It does matter.
Exactly.
Like, no, I'll never be somebody that says that. But this idea that, you know, from when I first came back to South Africa and was told, you're not black, I know why people say that. It's because I sound like this, I look like this, that's why. But my black experience is not, the black experience is not a monolithic experience. Just because my black experience doesn't look like your black experience or your coloured experience, in no way negates the experience.
Would you like to make one last comment?
I guess land. So in response to Carla's question, like, it feels like we're like an evicted people, and I'm speaking of to coloured people, to people who have a black experience or coloured experience, like from the get-go and even now. I feel like anyone who was subject to the Group Areas Act is a landless person and should have land. Any person who was colonized at any point in their existence is a landless person and should have access to land. The Khoi and the San, as Indigenous people, I mean, this is like a very like hot conversation that I personally have only come to like understand as part of a South African narrative very recently, the Khoi and the San experience, which is actually ridiculous because we don't get taught about it at school. We don't get taught about it from a decolonial lens, because I think of also what that would mean in our understanding that there were a whole bunch of people here from a whole bunch of different, you know, tribal ancestries, not like a little smattering of like hunter-gathering people that were like chilling on the mountains, that actually got not only forcibly removed and chased up into different areas, but I mean like massacred, you know, and that goes for a range of different kind of heritages. So the Khoi and the San should have land. You know, the people who were taken off Sandpark's land so that it could become a reservation like the Kruger, where people can pay a whole bunch of money to look at animals, should have that land back, you know. And I think that this is like it's a complicated conversation, and one where we go, it's not about who has a bigger stake to what piece of land, you know, who is indigenous, who is colonized. This entire group of human beings, regardless of, you know, racial, cultural identity, is landless people and must have land. And I'm sorry, but I'm also not sorry, but they're also white people sitting here. I mean, this is also a conversation about complicity. So like, if we're saying we must have land, like, how's that going to happen? And, you know, are we going to, like, take it, and then who takes what? Or are, you know, we going to start actually properly grappling with exactly how we go about that process, and who originates where, and in which spaces does, you know, the land need to, like, aggressively be repossessed? I don't know, it's just my...
Sure. I really want to honor just how Sarah and Kelly and Zimitri and Sara-Jayne have actually responded to a lot of what you raised in that ridiculously short period of time. And to thank you for your presence again, and to affirm what we started out with this idea of just disturbing the soil, shifting the frame, creating the breathing spaces that I hope we feel triggered and moved and inspired and stimulated enough about to not only buy the books, because they will be signing them downstairs and engaging around the further work, and the film is coming. Yes, the documentary film is in edit around the walk that they have done. But to bring, when I think about presence, I'm also thinking about this, the current conversation. Update this conversation. There have been enough triggers, catalysts, guides even, beacons for us to update this very tired, heavy conversation that many of us have felt ambivalent coming to, as you've also mentioned. Thank you to Leopard's Leap for the wine we will yet drink. Please support the Open Book Library project downstairs. There are book vouchers on sale. As I said, the authors will be signing these books. And I'm still sitting with the sense of violent erasure, silencing. When you asked, why is it dangerous? Why is this notion of a cocktail, or, you know, the genetic cocktail? These are violent ideas, and that it feels dangerous. And I think that we are surrounded by a lot of shame, fear, silencing, conscious, selective memory, amnesia. And we have to tread with compassion into those spaces and into these conversations. So it isn't just, okay, go out, buy the book and, you know, be evangelical about it, as much as I feel that too. But to go gently with ourselves and each other. Thank you so much.